There is a moment, quiet and unannounced, when everything in your life begins to change. And it does not begin with an event. It does not begin with a phone call, a windfall, a sudden reversal of fortune. It begins with a decision so subtle that most people walk right past it without ever noticing it happened. It begins the moment you decide, deep within yourself, that you will no longer be moved by what moves everyone else. Understand this. The moment you stop being bothered is the moment the universe stops testing you and starts answering you. Think about this for a moment. Every disturbance you have ever felt, every flash of anger, every wave of anxiety, every moment your peace was shattered by a word, a look, a delay, a disappointment, was never actually caused by the thing outside of you. It was caused by your agreement with it. You gave it permission to reach inside you and pull a lever, and the lever moved your entire inner world. The person did not make you angry. The circumstance did not make you afraid. You met it with a vibration that was already inside you, waiting for a reason to express itself, and the outer world simply obliged. This is the secret that changes everything once you truly see it. You are not a reactor to life, you are a broadcaster of life, and everything you see outside is simply the echo of the frequency you have already been transmitting. Let that sink into your spirit. You have spent so much of your life believing that your peace was conditional, that you could only feel calm when things were calm, that you could only feel safe when circumstances were safe, that you could only feel joyful when life gave you a reason to be joyful. But this is backwards. This is the illusion that keeps so many souls trapped in a cycle of reaction, exhausted, waiting for the outer world to grant them permission to feel good. The truth is far more powerful and far more freeing. Your peace was never meant to be a reaction. It was meant to be a decision. It was meant to be a state you enter and remain in, regardless of what parades past the window of your senses. Consider this. In the deepest teachings of consciousness, the ones that Neville Goddard spent his life pointing toward, there is a single thread that runs through everything. Imagination is the only reality. Not the world you see with your eyes, not the circumstances that seem so solid and so undeniable, but the inner world of assumption, feeling, and belief. What you assume to be true, what you feel to be true in the quiet chambers of your own mind, becomes the blueprint from which your outer experience is built. This is not poetry. This is not a metaphor to make you feel better. This is the mechanism of creation itself, operating in you and through you every single moment, whether you are aware of it or not. And here is why staying unbothered is not passive. It is not weakness. It is not avoidance. It is not pretending that pain does not exist. Staying unbothered is the highest form of spiritual mastery, because it means you have stopped giving your creative power away to whatever crosses your path. Every time you allow an external event to disturb your inner state, you are handing over the pen that writes your life to something outside of you. You are saying without words, I am not the author here, you are. And the outer world, always faithful to your beliefs, will happily accept that pen and continue writing chapters that confirm your disturbance was justified. But understand this, when you refuse to be shaken, when you meet chaos with a stillness that seems almost unreasonable to those around you, you are not being naive. You are remembering who you are. You are remembering that consciousness is the only reality, and that you, at your core, are consciousness itself, wearing the temporary garment of circumstance, but never actually bound by it. The wise ones throughout history, the mystics, the prophets, the ones who seemed to bend reality around them, they were not lucky. They had simply stopped reacting to the outer and started dwelling in the inner, and the outer, as it always must, rearranged itself to match. Feel this deeply for a moment. Somewhere inside you right now, there is a part of you that already knows this. There is a part of you that has always sensed that your emotional reactions to the world were somehow optional, even when it did not feel that way in the heat of the moment. That whisper you sometimes hear, the one that says, "Why am I letting this ruin my day?" Or "Why does this still have power over me?" That whisper is your higher self, gently reminding you that you were never meant to live at the mercy of circumstance. You were meant to live as the source of circumstance. Let this settle within you. The Bible, in its deepest symbolic language, tells the story of a storm on the sea and a teacher asleep in the boat while his students panic around him, terrified they are going to drown. And when they wake him, desperate, certain that catastrophe is imminent, he does not join their panic. He does not scramble for tools to fight the storm. He simply speaks to it, "Peace, be still," and the storm obeys. Now understand, this is not simply a historical account meant to describe a miracle from long ago. It is a picture of your own consciousness. The sea represents the ever-changing, ever-turbulent world of appearances, circumstances, and outer conditions. The disciples represent the part of you that reacts, that panics, that believes the storm has more authority than your peace. And the sleeping teacher, The one who remains calm, even while chaos surrounds him, represents the awakened state within you, the part of you that knows the storm cannot touch what is anchored in the word, in the assumption, in the inner conviction of peace. When you learn to stay unbothered, you are learning to speak peace to your own storms. You are learning that the external commotion, the unpaid bill, the harsh email, the diagnosis, the delay, the rejection, has no power of its own. It only has the power you assign to it through your emotional agreement with it. The moment you withdraw that agreement, the moment you refuse to let your inner sea churn in response to the outer weather, something remarkable begins to happen. The storm, deprived of the energy it needs to sustain itself in your experience, begins to dissolve. Not because you fought it, not because you controlled it, but because you simply stopped feeding it with your attention and your emotional charge. Notice what happens when you meet a triggering situation with unshakable calm instead of your usual reaction. Notice how the people around you who were expecting an argument do not know what to do with your silence. Notice how the situation that used to spiral for days now seems to resolve itself in hours. This is not coincidence. This is the law of consciousness responding precisely to the new state you have occupied. You cannot occupy peace and continue to attract chaos, any more than a radio tuned to one frequency can somehow play a station broadcasting on another. Your inner state is the frequency. The outer world is simply the radio playing back whatever you are tuned to. Imagine for a moment two people receiving the exact same piece of difficult news. One person collapses into fear, spirals into worst-case scenarios, loses sleep, loses appetite, becomes reactive with everyone around them, and broadcasts distress into every conversation they have for the next several days. The other person receives the same news, feels the initial wave of human emotion, because you are not being asked to become a stone, you are being asked to become sovereign. But instead of drowning in that wave, they return again and again to a center of calm. They remind themselves silently, I am not what is happening to me, I am what I choose to become in response to what is happening. They breathe, they still their mind, they refuse to marinate in the emotion. Now understand this, these two people, receiving the identical circumstance, will walk two entirely different paths forward, simply because their inner responses were different. The first person's continued agitation will attract more situations that require agitation. The second person's returning peace will attract circumstances that support resolution, clarity, and grace. This is not a theory. This is the operation of consciousness, and it never fails to be exact. You must realize that every emotion you feel is not simply a response to your circumstances. It is a request you are making to the universe for more of the same. Fear is a prayer for more to fear. Anger is a prayer for more to be angry about. Anxiety is a prayer for more uncertainty. And on the other side, peace is a prayer for more peace. Calm is a prayer for more calm. Faith is a prayer for more evidence to justify that faith. This is why staying unbothered is not simply a nice personality trait to cultivate. It is one of the most powerful spiritual practices available to you. Because every moment you remain undisturbed in the face of provocation, you are literally praying without words. And the universe, which cannot help but answer prayer, begins rearranging itself around your undisturbed state. The truth is, most people go through life believing that circumstances come first and feelings come second. That something happens and then, appropriately, they feel something about it. But the deeper truth, the truth that mystics and prophets and awakened teachers have always known, is that feeling comes first and circumstance follows to justify the feeling. This sounds impossible to the logical mind, because the logical mind has been trained by a lifetime of apparent cause and effect running in the opposite direction. But consciousness does not operate the way the five senses insist it must. Consciousness operates from the inside out, always, without exception. What you feel to be true, what you assume in your heart to already be your reality, becomes the seed from which your circumstances grow. And this is precisely why the outer world so often feels chaotic to people who have never learned to master their inner world. They are living entirely reactively, letting the seeds be planted by whatever crosses their path, rather than consciously choosing what they will feel and assume, regardless of what crosses their path. Allow yourself to see this from a higher vantage point. You are not a victim of your circumstances. You have never been a victim of your circumstances, even in seasons when it felt overwhelmingly true. You are, and have always been, the one doing the creating, whether consciously or unconsciously. The soul who reacts to every text message, every rumor, every delay, every disappointment with a spike of disturbance, is unconsciously creating more situations that will require the same reaction. And the soul who has learned to remain unbothered not through suppression, not through denial, but through a genuine inner conviction that nothing outside of them holds ultimate authority over their state, is consciously creating a life that increasingly reflects that same undisturbed peace. This is why the ancients spoke so often of the kingdom of God being within you, and not somewhere out there to be found, chased, or earned through worthy behavior. The kingdom within is not a place, it is a state. It is the state of consciousness in which you recognize that you are the operant power in your own experience, that nothing outside of you has any authority that you do not first grant it through your attention and your feeling. When you seek that kingdom first, when you make your inner peace, your inner assumption, your inner conviction the priority above all else, everything else, as the scripture promises, is added unto you. Not because you chased it, not because you fought for it, but because it was the natural, inevitable outer expression of the inner kingdom you had already claimed. Think about how differently you would move through your days if you truly believed this. Think about how much energy you have spent across the years defending your peace against every small offense, every inconvenience, every person who did not behave the way you wanted them to. Think about how much of your creative power has leaked out through the countless moments you allowed yourself to be bothered by things that in the grand architecture of your life meant nothing at all. Every one of those moments was a moment you could have spent building the world you actually want to live in, but instead you spent it defending against a world you do not want. This is the tragic misuse of the most powerful faculty you possess, your imagination, your feeling nature, your capacity to assume, squandered on maintaining agitation instead of manifesting your desire. You are not your circumstances. You must let that phrase move through you slowly. You are not the traffic that made you late. You are not the comment that stung. You are not the bank account that worries you. You are not the diagnosis, the rejection, the silence from someone you love, the years that seem to be passing without the change you have been praying for. You are the consciousness that is aware of all of these things, and consciousness by its very nature is never actually touched by what it observes. The ocean is not disturbed by the debris floating on its surface. The sky is not stained by the clouds that pass through it. And you, the deepest, truest, most eternal part of you, are not altered by the passing weather of circumstance, unless you agree to identify with the weather instead of remembering that you are the sky. You are the one who effuses. You are the one who feels. You are the one who, in the privacy of your own imagination, decides what is true for you, regardless of what the senses report. This is your divine inheritance, and it was never meant to be surrendered to every person, headline, delay, or disappointment that crosses your path. The truth is, the entire external world is simply a mirror, faithfully reflecting back to you the sum total of your inner assumptions. And when you understand this fully, you stop fighting the mirror. You stop trying to rearrange the reflection with your bare hands. You go to the source. You change the face looking into the mirror, and the reflection has no choice but to follow. This is why staying unbothered is directly connected to seeing miracles happen in your life. A miracle, properly understood, is not a violation of law. It is the fulfillment of a higher law that most people have simply never learned to operate by. What looks miraculous to someone who believes only in cause and effect running from outside to inside is in fact perfectly lawful to someone who understands that consciousness creates reality, that assumption creates experience, and that a fixed, undisturbed, faithful inner state must, by the very nature of creation, produce an outer confirmation. The miracle is not random. The miracle is not luck. The miracle is the mathematically certain result of a consciousness that has stopped agreeing with lack, stopped agreeing with fear, stopped agreeing with disturbance, and has instead taken up permanent residence in the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Consider this. Every story of transformation you have ever admired, every testimony of someone who overcame overwhelming odds, every account of a sudden turnaround that defied all logical explanation, has one thing in common beneath the surface details. At some point, the person stopped being bothered by the appearance of their circumstance. They may have felt fear initially. They were human, after all. But they made a decision, often a quiet, private, unannounced decision, to no longer let the appearance dictate their inner state. They began instead to assume the state of the wish fulfilled. They began to walk around, think, speak, and feel as though the thing they desired was already true, regardless of what the five senses were still reporting. And in every single case, without exception, the outer world eventually rearranged itself to match the unwavering inner conviction. This is not the exception to how consciousness works. This is the rule. It has simply been forgotten, buried under generations of teaching that told you to trust only what you can see, touch, and measure. You must realize that your senses were never designed to show you truth. They were designed to show you your current beliefs, played back to you as apparent reality, so convincingly that you mistake the reflection for the source. This is why so many people spend their entire lives trying to change their circumstances directly, fighting the reflection, rearranging the furniture in the mirror, wondering why nothing ever really changes, even when they win small temporary victories. The soul who understands consciousness does not fight the reflection. The soul who understands consciousness goes within, revises the assumption, feels the wish fulfilled, and remains undisturbed by whatever the mirror is currently showing. Because they know the mirror always updates eventually, it has no choice. It is simply obeying the law of its own nature. Let this truth settle into the deepest part of your being. The delay between your inner conviction and its outer confirmation is not evidence that the law has failed you. It is simply the natural lag between planting and harvest, a lag that exists in every act of creation, seen and unseen. The farmer does not dig up the seed every single day to check whether it is growing, and in doing so, destroy the very process he is trying to nurture. The farmer plants, waters, and then, crucially, walks away and trusts. This is where so many people lose their miracle before it has a chance to fully form. Not because their assumption was wrong, but because their impatience, their disturbance, their anxious checking and rechecking of the outer world uproots the seed again and again before it has had time to take hold. Staying unbothered, then, is not simply about emotional comfort. It is about protecting the very seeds you have planted in consciousness, giving them the undisturbed soil they need to grow into the harvest you are waiting for. Understand this. Every time you catch yourself becoming anxious about whether your desire is manifesting quickly enough, every time you find yourself scanning the outer world for evidence, growing frustrated when that evidence has not yet appeared, you are, in that very moment, disturbing the soil around your own seed. You are, without realizing it, praying the opposite prayer, a prayer of doubt, a prayer of lack, a prayer that says, "It has not happened, and I am afraid it will not happen." And because consciousness always answers precisely what it is given, that fearful, doubting prayer competes directly with the original assumption you planted, delaying and sometimes even completely uprooting the very thing you were hoping to grow. This is why the great teachers of manifestation have always emphasized, above almost everything else, the discipline of remaining calm, remaining faithful, remaining unbothered between the moment of assumption and the moment of confirmation. It is in that gap, that sacred, often uncomfortable gap, that your mastery is truly tested and truly built. Think about this for a moment. What would your life look like if you decided, right now, in this very moment, that you were simply done being bothered by things that do not align with your desired reality? Not through denial, not through pretending problems do not exist, but through a deep, settled inner knowing that your assumption is the truth, regardless of the current appearance, and that the appearance is simply outdated information, still catching up to a decision you have already made within. This is the state that biblical scripture calls faith, not blind hope, not wishful thinking, but the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. Faith, properly understood, is simply the discipline of staying unbothered by what is, because you are utterly convinced of what shall be. Feel this deeply. You have likely spent years, perhaps decades, allowing your emotional state to be determined by external evidence. You waited for the diagnosis to look good before you allowed yourself to feel healthy. You waited for the bank statement to look good before you allowed yourself to feel abundant. You waited for the relationship to look secure before you allowed yourself to feel loved. And in doing so, you unknowingly kept yourself locked in exactly the conditions you were trying to escape, because you were always waiting for the effect before you were willing to embody the cause. The truth, spoken so simply and so often overlooked, is that you must feel it before you see it. You must be unbothered by the absence of evidence before the evidence has any reason to appear. This is the reversal of ordinary human thinking, and it is precisely why so few people ever fully step into their creative power, because it requires them to trust an inner reality more than an outer one, and most of humanity has never been taught how to do that. But you are being taught now. Let that sink into your spirit. You are being reminded now, in this very moment, that you were always the author, never merely the character. You were always the one holding the pen, even in seasons when you felt like nothing more than ink on someone else's page. The awakening you are moving through as you absorb these words is not new information being added to you. It is old, buried truth being remembered, being unearthed from beneath years of conditioning that told you the outer world was the primary reality and your inner world was simply a passive commentary on it. Reverse that order now. Let your inner world become primary. Let your outer world become the faithful, if sometimes delayed, servant of whatever you have decided to feel is true. Consider what it would mean to walk through your day completely unmoved by the small provocations that used to derail you entirely. The impatient driver, the curt reply, the plan that fell through, the comment that used to sting for hours. Imagine meeting each of these with a quiet internal smile, not because you are suppressing anything, but because you have simply outgrown the need to let small things determine your state. This is not spiritual bypassing, this is spiritual sovereignty. You are allowed to feel the full range of human emotion, but you are no longer required to live there, to marinate there, to let a 5-minute irritation steal 5 hours of your peace. You are learning, moment by moment, to return, again and again, as many times as it takes, to the center, to the state of unbothered calm that is your true home. You are not the anxious thoughts that pass through your mind. You are the awareness observing those thoughts, and awareness, by definition, is never actually disturbed by what it witnesses. You are not the fear that occasionally visits you in the quiet hours of the night. You are the vast, unshakable presence in which that fear briefly appears, and then, if you do not feed it with your attention, just as quickly disappears. You are not the sum of your worst days, your hardest seasons, your most painful disappointments. You are the eternal, unchanging consciousness that has walked through every single one of those seasons and is still here, still breathing, still capable of choosing a different inner state in this very instant, regardless of what came before. This is why the wise ones throughout history so often seem strange to those around them, not because they lacked feeling, but because they had mastered the art of not being owned by their feelings. They could sit in the middle of loss and still radiate peace. They could stand before accusation and still remain unshaken. They could walk through uncertainty and still speak with the calm authority of someone who already knew the ending. This is not a personality trait reserved for a spiritual elite. This is a state available to you, right now, the moment you decide to stop outsourcing your peace to circumstances that were never worthy of holding that much power over you in the first place. Notice what happens the very next time something tries to disturb you. A message, a delay, a disappointment, and instead of reacting immediately, you pause, you breathe, you silently remind yourself, I am the one who assumes, I am the one who decides what this means, I am not required to be bothered by this. Notice the space that opens up in that pause. Notice how in that space you suddenly have access to a version of yourself that responds instead of reacts, that creates instead of merely reflects. This pause, practiced consistently, becomes the doorway through which your entire life begins to transform, because every time you choose peace over provocation, you are reinforcing to your own subconscious mind that you are the authority here, not the circumstance. The subconscious mind, understand this clearly, does not distinguish between what is real and what is vividly and repeatedly imagined and felt as true. It simply accepts whatever impression is given to it with feeling and conviction, and then faithfully goes to work producing outer conditions that match that impression. This is why repetition matters so deeply in this work, not repetition of words alone, but repetition of state. Every time you choose to remain unbothered, you are impressing upon your subconscious a new definition of who you are and what you are willing to allow into your experience. And the subconscious, ever obedient, ever faithful, begins reorganizing your circumstances to match this new, calmer, more sovereign identity you are consistently embodying. You must realize that your identity is not fixed. It is not something that happened to you once and now must be carried forward unchanged for the rest of your life. Identity, in the deepest spiritual sense, is simply a state you have practiced so consistently that it has become familiar, almost automatic. And because it is practiced rather than permanent, it can be changed the same way it was built, through consistent, repeated choice. Every time you choose the unbothered state over the reactive state, you are not performing a temporary trick. You are literally reconstructing your identity, brick by brick, choice by choice, until the old identity, the one that used to be shaken by every small wind, no longer fits you, no longer feels natural, and eventually falls away entirely, replaced by a new self who moves through the world from a place of calm, unshakable authority. This identity shift is the hinge upon which everything else turns. You cannot consistently attract circumstances that contradict your settled identity, because consciousness, the great creator, always seeks to express what it believes itself to be. If your settled identity is someone who is easily disturbed, easily overwhelmed, easily thrown off course, then no matter how many affirmations you speak, no matter how many visualization sessions you practice, your outer world will continue producing situations that require disturbance, overwhelm, and derailment, because that is the truest, most consistent broadcast coming from within you. But the moment your settled identity shifts to someone who remains calm regardless of circumstance, someone whose peace is not for sale, someone who has already decided what their state will be before the day even begins, the entire architecture of your outer experience must eventually reorganize to reflect that new broadcast. There is no other possibility. Consciousness is exact. It does not play favorites, and it does not make mistakes. It simply mirrors, faithfully and completely, whatever state you have most consistently occupied. Allow yourself to see how this connects directly to the miracles you have been praying for, waiting for, hoping for. A miracle is simply what happens when your inner state becomes so settled, so unshakably assumed, that the outer world has no choice but to catch up and confirm it. The people who seem to experience miracle after miracle are not spiritually favored above everyone else. They have simply learned, through practice or through grace, to occupy the unbothered, faithful, already fulfilled state more consistently than those around them. They have stopped bargaining with the universe from a place of desperation and disturbance, and instead they rest in the calm, quiet confidence of already having received. This is the posture the ancient teacher spoke of when he said, "Believe that you have received it, and it shall be given to you." Notice the tense. Not, "Believe that you will receive it someday, if you are patient and good enough." Believe that you have already received it, now, in this moment, and let that belief settle you into such an unbothered state that the appearance of its absence no longer has any power to move you. This is challenging for the analytical mind to accept, because it seems to ask you to believe something the senses have not yet confirmed. But this is precisely the discipline of spiritual mastery, learning to trust your inner assumption more than your outer circumstance, learning to let your feeling of fulfillment come first, and your outer confirmation come second, as the natural, inevitable, faithful servant of what you have already decided within. Every great manifestation, every so-called miracle, follows this exact order, without exception, throughout all of recorded human experience. Inner state first, outer confirmation second, never the reverse. You are being invited now to practice this in the smallest details of your daily life, not just in the large dramatic desires you carry. Practice staying unbothered when the line at the store is long. Practice staying unbothered when someone misunderstands your intention. Practice staying unbothered when a plan changes at the last moment. These small practices are not unimportant. They are the training ground, the spiritual gymnasium in which you build the muscle of unshakable inner peace, so that when the larger tests come, and they will come because growth requires them, you will already have developed the strength to remain centered, calm, and faithful, regardless of what the outer world is currently displaying. Understand this: the miracles you are waiting for are not being withheld from you by some distant, arbitrary God testing your worthiness. They are being delayed, if they are delayed at all, by your own continued agreement with disturbance, doubt, and impatience. The moment you release that agreement, the moment you decide, fully and completely, that you will remain unbothered, regardless of how long the outer confirmation takes to appear, you remove the very obstruction that was slowing the process. This does not mean you will never feel anything. It means you will no longer be owned by what you feel. You will feel the wave, and you will let it pass through you, without letting it knock you off the center you have worked so hard to build. Let this truth become a permanent resident within you. You are not waiting for a miracle to happen to you from somewhere outside. You are the very consciousness through which the miracle must pass in order to become visible. You are the doorway, you are the channel. And a doorway that is constantly slamming shut in fear, doubt, and disturbance cannot allow much of anything to pass through it cleanly. But a doorway that remains open, calm, and unbothered, trusting, patient, faithful, becomes the clearest possible channel through which the miracle you have been asking for can finally, fully, completely arrive. So from this moment forward, let your unbothered state become your spiritual signature. Let it become the thing people notice about you before they notice anything else. Let it become so consistent, so deeply embodied, that circumstances which used to derail you for days now barely register a ripple in your peace. Not because you have stopped caring about your life, but because you have finally remembered who is actually in charge of it. You are not a leaf blown about by every wind of circumstance. You are the very consciousness that circumstance must ultimately obey, once you stop giving it permission to disturb you. Feel this as your new truth. You are calm, not because life is easy, but because you have decided that your peace does not depend on life being easy. You are unbothered, not because nothing challenging ever comes your way, but because you have finally understood that your reaction to the challenge, not the challenge itself, determines what comes next. You are the one who assumes, the one who feels, the one who decides, moment by moment, what will be allowed to move you and what will simply pass by, powerless, because you have already claimed your peace as non-negotiable. And so you walk forward now, not waiting for the miracle to convince you to feel good, but feeling good, feeling settled, feeling unbothered as the very cause that summons the miracle into visible form. You walk forward as the calm center of your own storm, as the sleeping teacher in the boat who has already spoken peace over the chaos, as the sovereign consciousness that was never actually at the mercy of anything it did not first agree to be moved by. You walk forward remembering more fully with every step that the kingdom was always within you, that the power was always within you, that the miracle was always waiting patiently on the other side of your willingness to stay undisturbed long enough for it to fully arrive.